body of human knowledge. So we should think holistically about things like technology infrastructure. Telco towers are going to be increasingly as important to education as teachers in schools, not to minimize the latter, obviously, but I wanted to point out that the role of technology is going to be increasingly important, and we should continue to think about this.
Thank you. The second question is investing in the health workforce and how to improve the outcome through the payment. Can the World Bank support the payment, improving the salary of the health worker?
Just to give a perspective, normally the bank financing does not extend to salaries, but I think there are many projects where the project workers are supported in their efforts in health or education, and as long as it does not lead to creation of ongoing liabilities, but provides services that are required of a particular nature, these are generally covered under project funding, but not a salary specifically is something that we have not looked at till now, and it will require a lot of thinking. It has certain implications for fiscal management and sustainability also.
The third question, before we will move to the next topic, it's about the PPP in education in terms of policy, investment, and technical assistance. And link with the private sector, is that going also to widen, because there's a concern, widen disparity when it comes to the private education?
It's again a very important aspect to be taken into account. I would like to call attention to the fact that there is nothing intrinsic in public or private with respect to impacts on distribution. I can give an example. The World Bank made a study on my country, on the education system in Brazil, where you have free public universities, and free public universities which happen to be the best in the country. Most of them are public and for free. But given the fact that you don't have the same access for fundamental education, the free schooling at the high level in Brazil concentrates income. There's nothing intrinsic in being public or private in fomenting higher or lower degrees of income concentration. It all depends on the rules of engagement. It all depends on the way by which the system demands quality tests, establish the competition, and make sure that and provides and may provide subsidies to the poor so as to make possible for them to have at pair the same level of access to education. The point is, there's nothing intrinsic in putting together public and private efforts. On the contrary, in many infrastructure sectors, like in many others, there's no other way in the future but using complementarities, exploring the complementarities between public and private sector. Thank you.
Patrizio.
Yes, I mean, building on what Ottaviano was saying, I mean, PPPs are instruments, and instruments are not intrinsically good or bad. It depends on how they are used. And so even private sector involvement in education, I mean, depends on what is able to achieve and how it's able to achieve. You can also argue that, I mean, free education for everybody is a subsidy to the rich. So by doing that, it can increase inequality. So any type of policy or investment must be really brought to the data in order to understand whether it's effective or not effective. I saw private sector projects in very poor areas of countries that were able to raise the, say, to improve the outcome of kids well above other kids in more advanced areas of the same countries. So if through private sector investment we are able to do that, I think that is a good thing.
Thank you. Werner.
Thank you. My name is Werner Gruber. I'm representing Switzerland, Poland, Serbia, Azerbaijan, and the 5 Central Asian countries. I just wanted very rapidly to add on what had already been said. I think the aspect of maximizing financing for development is critical for the bank, as we are confronted with the challenges of the Sustainable Development Goals. So the bank is working hard actually in mobilizing financing for development, and this includes obviously also mobilizing private sector financing. So I think it is important that we keep ourselves actually open towards also options of involving the private sector. And this is not only the case for education, where it is maybe difficult, health is difficult as well, but also we were speaking about climate challenges before, I think, where we need to much more consider the options also of bringing the private sector in. And as had been said, often it is really about the rules and regulations, which are critical actually to mobilize this kind of financing. This said, I think there is many risks linked to this, in particular in public-private partnerships in education and health. We need to carefully look into that, obviously, and the bank is actually working on trying to identify standards also and criteria actually to assess these kind of projects, in particular in education as well. Thank you.
So only to complement what has been said, so if I understand correctly, we were referring to sorting. So if you have more income, you will be able to access to better education than if you don't have enough income. But that doesn't mean that public and private should complement, but it means that everybody should have the same opportunity. And that requires, as Mr. Werner was saying, that we have the complements in place, or the regulatory mechanisms in place that will assure the same quality of education both in the public and the private sector. So we need to be very careful on this. If we want to bring private sector into it, we need to be careful that the complements exist in the country so that they can assure that the quality is the same. And also we need to be sure that there is an option for kids that cannot afford those levels of education. And that's why the bank needs to keep investing very strongly in public education and top quality of education. At the end, we want homogeneous quality in both private and public sectors.
Thank you. I'm sure those responses have elicited lots of reactions, follow-up questions, and the like. In the interest of time, we do have to keep moving along, but what I may suggest is if you have any ideas specifically in response to the invitation from the bank to help inform the human capital development strategy, or perhaps in developing the criteria and standards around private sector provision, feel free to note them down on a paper and pass it on to me at the end of the session so that we can pass them along. Similarly, I understand some of you might have position statements which you would like to have raised with the board of directors. We welcome those statements. You can send them to me, and then we will make sure that they get passed on to the board of directors. So let's move on to the next topic, and I think in a way each of these are flowing from the next. Let's talk about inclusion. A lot of questions around the space for the most vulnerable in the bank's work. Persons with disabilities, youth, aging populations, LGBTQIs. So we'll start with that corner of the room. One last comment from me. I know that you will perhaps experience some level of frustration if your specific question doesn't get an opportunity to be aired. We'll try to come back at the end to take one last round, but request everyone, colleagues from the bank, our civil society friends, to try and be brief so that we can cover as much ground as possible. So over to you.
David Allen, Spectrum, Myanmar. We see shrinking civil society space in so many places at this point in time. We've heard the statement that all human knowledge is on the internet. At